About 50 years ago, an astronaut returning from the moon experienced things that he couldn't find a scientific explanation for. So, with some colleagues, he launched a new science focused on the mind and how it works in the body and across space and time. It's the field of Noetics, where the tools of modern science are used to help us understand how what we think and feel affects us and the world around us. Now, this is Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments from the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon.
This is Noetic Moments, the show that explores what consciousness is, what it does, how it works, and how our lives could be much fuller if we understood it better. I am Ruth Miller, a longtime student of consciousness, cybernetics, and culture, and through this series of programs, I'm introducing some of the people whose work has defined this field of research, and I'm explaining some of their ideas and experiments. I'll also explore relevant news items and answer questions that you send to my email address, ruth@noeticmoments.org, and Noetic is spelled Noetic. Over the years we've been doing these programs, we've learned that although the medical world defines consciousness as what we're aware of now, most of what goes on in the mind is not in our conscious awareness at all, but goes on in other aspects of mind or consciousness. Besides our normal awareness, the conscious mind, there's what keeps our bodies going and includes our fears and beliefs about threats and dangers, which is the subconscious mind, and what connects us with our highest ideals and guides us in our actions, the superconscious mind. We've learned that we can change our state of consciousness so that we're aware of different aspects of mind at different times. And then we learned that the brain modifies whatever sensory signals it receives to fit past patterns of experience, following a default network or structure in the brain. This means that we perceive, we see, hear, taste, smell, and feel what our brains expect to experience based on the past. We've learned that no one yet has been able to pinpoint how ideas and thoughts are formed in the brain tissue, and we saw that our body often responds faster than nerve impulses or chemicals can travel in the body. Some experiments have even demonstrated that a person's mind continues to perceive and process for as much as several hours, even when the brain and heart are flatlined and the person has been declared dead. Based on all this, many scientists have come to accept that what we call mind is not the product of the electrochemical activity of the cells making up the brain, but is in fact the activity of a field that surrounds and permeates the brain and the body. It's possible to measure at least a portion of this field as electromagnetic activities for several inches around the body in what some say is an egg shape extending from below our knees to a few inches above our heads. Mind, then, is a field, a pattern of energy that exists whether the body is functioning or not, and permeates and develops with the body and the brain. This means that the brain is best understood as a receiver-transmitter, receiving messages from the mind and transmitting them to the body, and receiving messages from the organs and senses and transmitting them to the body as the subconscious mind. Some researchers are exploring how the two hemispheres of our brain are involved in this transmitting and receiving from the world, primarily through the left hemisphere, and with our mind primarily through the right hemisphere. We've also learned that this field of mind affects energy and matter in a variety of ways. For example, when the subatomic building blocks of the universe show up as energy or matter in quantum physics experiments, depending on whether a mind is present to observe them. We've seen that people's bodies and their pets have been observed to change when someone they're connected with turns attention their way. We've also learned how individuals and the collective human mind change the readouts from random number generators on the network of computers run by the Global Consciousness Project. Now, Every field is a unique pattern of vibration that's different from other fields, and these fields can vibrate along similar patterns, resonating with each other, affecting each other across space and time. As a result, a growing number of scientists are seeing our individual mind as part of a larger field. They're equating the mind with the quantum or zero-point field out of which all matter and energy arise. And some researchers are using the equations of quantum mechanics, relativity, and computer learning algorithms to describe the role that consciousness plays in the formation of matter. Together, these understandings have helped explain things like the law of attraction, how the world around us mirrors what our consciousness is focusing on, accessing information through insight, intuition, and channeling, how dreams affect the body and consciousness, how music affects the brain and the body and connects us with other minds, how we can enhance or slow down our healing processes through our thoughts, emotions, and visualizations, and how the belief in a treatment can help a patient experience healing in the placebo effect, how remote viewing and telekinesis work, and how we can get into a state of flow in which the mind and the brain are in sync, maximizing our effectiveness. And finally, how our thoughts and emotions affect our overall well-being, mind, body, spirit, relationships, finances, and work. You can catch up on our past shows on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where you'll also find links to clips, books, and authors that I mention. We've talked about a lot of different things in recent weeks. We haven't talked hardly at all about meditation. Meditation is a practice that many of us get scared of when we hear the word because someone told us that we have to sit perfectly still and empty our brains. Fortunately, that is not what meditation is. In fact, you can meditate walking or swimming or sewing or ironing or doing any task that the mind is not focused on your inner narrative, where the brain's default system and structure is not running the show. Meditation is a powerful tool, and I thought you might like to hear about some of the research people are doing with it now.
Meditation in the brain has focused on two major domains that meditation actually affects. One is attention, and the other is emotion. And what we have discovered is that the circuits in the brain that are important for regulating both attention and emotion can be transformed by meditation. Looking at our gamma oscillations in the brain, they're very fast frequency brain oscillations, and they're seen in any ordinary person, but they're seen for very, very short periods of time, typically less than 1 second. They also don't have such large amplitude. And when Miguel Rinpoche was meditating, these signals were large, they were highly synchronized, and they lasted for many, many minutes. They lasted for the entire time that the meditation session was in progress. And that's what made them very visible. So that was really a very important moment, because we knew from a scientific perspective, there was a there there. We can see that a person who meditates for even just 2 weeks, 30 minutes a day, shows a different pattern of brain activity than when they started 2 weeks before. And that is really important, because it suggests that the brain really is plastic, that we really can make these changes, and that it actually doesn't take that much. A total of 7 hours of practice was sufficient to change the brain in very objective, measurable ways.
So 30 minutes a day for 2 weeks, and one's brain has been changed in a way that these gamma waves, these very high frequency waves that normal people can only experience very briefly, are able to be our norm. This is the power of meditation and the rewiring of our brains. Now, those gamma frequencies, if you recall from previous shows, are associated with the mind rather than the default structure of the brain being the manager of our brain's activities. So meditation is an important tool, and here is clear proof. Now, the Rinpoche means beloved. So this is a Buddhist teacher who is from Tibet. And this is from a documentary called A Joyful Mind. The Rinpoche's ability to sustain the gamma level of mental activity, of brain activity, for however long he chose to be in the meditative state is simply an indication of his years of practice. If you've followed anything around Tibetan Buddhism, you're aware that they start very, very young. And Alan Wallace's book, Genuine Happiness, can take an individual through that process from that very beginning, early stages. So what is it that's really going on when we meditate? I'm going to draw again on Andrew Huberman, the neurophysiologist from Stanford University, and he's interviewing Sam Harris here. Let's see what he has to say.
People exist in varying degrees of structured and unstructured internal dialogue, and in varying depths of recognition of that internal dialogue. And so the question, I suppose, is just the recognition that there's a dialogue ongoing internally, is that itself valuable?
Yeah, and that also can take some time. So here's a claim I would make that some people might find surprising, but I think this is an objectively true claim about the subjectivity of most people, which is that unless you have a remarkable amount of training in what's called, concentration practice in meditation, a true claim that, if we just put a stopwatch on this table and people could just watch it, 30 seconds elapse, and I set all of our listeners or your viewers the task, for the next 30 seconds, just pay attention to anything, your breath, or the side of your hand or the side of the clock or any object, without getting lost in thought, without getting momentarily distracted by this conversation you're having with yourself. A couple things would happen. One is no one would be able to do it, right? And not just, this is not just a superficial inability. I mean, if your life depended on it, you wouldn't be able to do it. I mean, if the fate of civilization depended on it, none of our listeners would be able to do this. And yet some percentage of them are so distracted by thought that they would think that they will actually try this experiment and think they succeeded, right? And for these people, what happens is you put them on a meditation retreat and you have them spend 12 hours a day in silence doing nothing but this, right? So the practice is just pay attention to the breath when they're sitting, and then eventually you incorporate everything, sounds and other sensations. And then you interleave that with walking meditation where they're paying attention just to the sensations of lifting and moving and placing their feet. And then, once the practice is going, you incorporate sounds and sights and everything. But so you can pay attention to everything, but the goal is for every moment, you are going to cultivate this faculty of mind, which increasingly is known as mindfulness, right? So, and mindfulness is nothing other than this very careful attention to the contents of consciousness. But the crucial piece is, it is not a moment of being lost in thought, right? You're not blocking thoughts. Thoughts themselves can arise, but in those moments of being truly mindful, you're noticing thoughts as thoughts, whether it's language in the mind or images. You're noticing those too as spontaneous appearances in consciousness. If most people, certainly anyone who thinks they can pay attention to, they can do the experiment successfully that I just suggested, pay attention to something for 30 seconds without being lost in thought. You put those people on a meditation retreat, what they're going to experience is, on the first day, they're going to feel like, oh yeah, I was with the breath, or I was walking, I was with the sensations of walking, and I'd be there for like 5 minutes, solid, and then I would get lost in thought, then I'd come back, and then, 5 more minutes, I'd be lost in thought, and then get back. But as the days progressed, even, 10 days into a silent meditation retreat, they're going to experience more and more distraction. It's going to seem like, okay, wait a minute. Now I can't pay attention to anything for more than 5 seconds, right? That is progress, right? Because what they're discovering is just how distractible they are, right? And so for some people that will be immediately obvious. For some people, it'll actually take a lot of practice to realize just how distracted they are.
So the process of meditation is not about emptying our mind. It's about redirecting the brain from its normal default structure of thought processes to focus on something in particular. Typically, we tell people, focus on your breath. As he suggested, there are other things we could be focusing on, and ultimately that initial focus is expanded to include every sound, every vibration, everything that is within the range of one's senses, so that one is fully mindful. And this is the goal of meditation. Well, if you've just tuned in, you are listening to Noetic Moments, a radio show exploring what consciousness is, how it works, and how our lives can be greatly enhanced as we understand it more fully. I am Ruth Miller, your host, and that sound tells me it's time to shift gears. Look at a book, answer any questions you email to ruth@noeticmoments.org, and maybe take a look at what's going on in the news that can help us understand the role our state of consciousness plays in our experience. So the current issue of Neuroscience News here at April 2024 says the spinal cord possesses its own learning and memory capabilities, challenging the long-held view of it as merely a message relay between the brain and the body. Through innovative experiments, the abstract says, the team identified 2 distinct neuronal populations that enable the spinal cord to independently adapt and remember movements. This groundbreaking work, it says, not only provides insight into the spinal cord's complex. This groundbreaking work, the article says, not only provides insight into the spinal cord's complex role in movement, but it also opens new avenues for rehabilitation strategies following spinal injuries. So we're used to thinking that the brain sends signals to the rest of the body down the spinal cord. However, anyone who studied dinosaurs when they were in elementary school may remember that there were ganglia at various points along the spine in these huge animals in order to allow the animals to have signals to tell them what parts to move when. They were just too big for an electrical signal to move fast enough. Well, those ganglia are in fact still present in mammalian spines, is what this study is telling us. They used a novel experimental setup that measures movement changes in mice, showing spinal cord plasticity. And we've all heard stories, especially if you've read the book Psychoneuroimmunology, or you've heard of Joe Dispenza, or you even watched the movie The Secret or The Healing Matrix. All of them tell us stories of people and show us, in some cases, people whose spinal cords were broken or cut through accidents or whatever, and because they were able to overcome the belief of the medical staff around them, they were able to heal their spines and experience full mobility afterwards. So we know, if we've been paying attention to those stories, that there is neuroplasticity in the spinal cord. And what these studies, these findings in this study tell us is that we can probably begin to look at a much more complex circuit that defines movement. Now, the study actually came out in Science magazine today, and this is April 12th of 2024, and is being reported in Neuroscience News. It points out that nerve cells in the spinal cord can learn to adjust various tasks autonomously given sufficient repetitive practice. Now, neuroscientists have not understood that at all in the past. What we know from our work with visualization is that it is possible to, quote, practice, unquote, through visualizing. If you see yourself making the movement often enough, the brain and body say, oh, I know how to make that movement, and make that movement. So the people on this research team are saying they were having troubles measuring the activity of individual neurons in the spinal cord. And what they figured out is a model in which animals trained specific movements within minutes, and they found the cell that was specific to that learning. So Simon Lavaud, Lavaud, and his colleagues at the Takeoka lab built a special experimental setup just to be able to do this. And they identified two sets of neurons. They say they take turns. The dorsal neurons help the spinal cord learn a new movement, while the ventral neurons help it remember and perform the movement later. So this is a marvelous, marvelous reconfirmation of the fact that intelligence exists throughout the body. The mind is able to work with every part of the body, and this particular story is one more demonstration in the presence of neuronal ganglia in the spinal cord. It's just marvelous. And in a whole nother avenue, the research being reported by New Scientist says that researchers have identified that sad music might cause us to feel moved in an emotionally positive way. This may be through experiencing empathy or through appreciating the artistry of the piece. A new study at the University of South Wales in Australia involved asking 50 people, mostly undergraduate music students, to think about a piece of music they love but consider sad, which included compositions ranging from Beethoven to Taylor Swift. They then answered an online questionnaire about their feelings after listening. And finally, the participants were asked to try to imagine that the sadness in their selected piece of music could somehow be removed. Overall, the participants said this made them appreciate it less. In another part of the experiment, Schubert at New South Wales asked a separate 53 people, again, mostly undergraduate music students, to identify a piece of music they love and consider moving. And these participants widely reported feeling sad while listening to the piece despite enjoying it. He's suggesting that it's possible that the participants are blending the emotions of being sad and moved, thereby experiencing a direct link between sadness and overall pleasure. They might even be using the words sadness and moving to describe the same or closely related feeling. At the same time, someone at the University of Oslo, Vuokoski, says the sadness expressed by an artist may trigger the feeling of being moved if the listener experiences empathy. People may also relate to the lyrics of sad songs, helping them to feel less alone in what they are going through. So we've talked a lot about music on this show, mostly having to do with the vibrations and the effect of resonance. But it turns out that the words themselves are having an impact, and also the tone of the music can have an impact, in part a function of our sense of feeling moved. So as you're listening to music next time, pay attention. Are the words moving you because you feel empathetic or you're feeling not alone? Or are the feelings of the way the composition is put together causing you to feel moved and appreciative because they tap into some part of you? Whatever it is, this is part of being mindful. What is it that I am feeling in this moment? Which gets us back to what is going on when we're really meditating, and how we can, as we discovered earlier in this show, begin to get those gamma waves growing in our brain so that we are clearly operating from the mind that we are, rather than from the default structure that the culture has trained us to experience in our brain. Well, that's it for today's show. We are out of time for today, but remember, you can continue the exploration on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where there are links to archived past shows and the titles and other resources that we refer to on the show, and where you can send me your comments and questions, which I'll do my best to get answered the next time we're on the air. And for those of you who are in the know and in streaming, we are on SoundCloud through the KXCR.net, or you can just search for Ruth L Miller or Noetic Moments on SoundCloud. For now, thanks for joining me here on Noetic Moments, recorded in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon. And have a wonderful week.
You've been listening to Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments. This program is produced in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in beautiful Florence, Oregon, supported by you, our listeners. Our theme music is Tumbling Planets, composed and performed by Jeff Lovejoy. To hear this program again or learn more about Noetic Sciences, search our website, www.noeticmoments.org.